Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on well-being leadership and strategies for leading during challenging times. My name is Molly Buss, and I'm the Community Relations Manager at the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And my role for this webinar is to help moderate the chat. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick introduction of the Bakken Center for those that may not be familiar with our work. It is our vision to advance the health and well-being of individuals, organizations, and communities through integrative health and healing. And in an effort to make our programming accessible during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're hosting several free webinars and providing other resources to help you take charge of your health and well-being. And I'll share more information about that via email after the webinar concludes. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Jo Kreitzer, Director of the Bakken Center, and Mariann Johnson, Mindfulness and Wellbeing Instructor. But before I turn things over to Mariann and Mary Jo, there's just a few logistical items I wanted to cover to help you navigate the webinar functions. The presenters will pose questions throughout the session, and you'll have the opportunity to share your responses via the chat box. And if you're comfortable and want to share your responses with all participants, please just make sure to update the to field in the chat box to all panelists and attendees. You're also welcome to submit your questions for the presenters via the chat function, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions as we can. Please note you also have the opportunity to minimize the chat box throughout the presentation, and we invite for you to do that during the components that aren't interactive to help you stay present. If you aren't able to find that chat icon, hover your mouse over the bottom of the webinar screen and it should pop up for you. Finally, we'll send out an email and follow up with a recording of the webinar and some other resources. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Mariann.
Thanks so much, Molly, for that nice introduction, and welcome to all of you to our webinar today on well-being leadership. Strategies for working through these challenging times we're all facing right now. I just wanted you to know that I'm about to start my presentation. I'm going to go through a presentation with you, then Mary Jo is going to join me online, and we're going to hold a conversation with you, get some of your ideas and questions so that we can talk about strategies together as a community. So I'm also going to turn off my video, and I want you to know that now while I'm doing the presentation, just to help with those inevitable bandwidth issues that some of us are facing these days. So again, a very, very warm welcome. Our intent in doing this today is to really help you as an individual leader, and then really help you serve all of those that you lead, your constituents, your team members, everybody. So welcome, and let's get started. All right. So I want to cover with you, or go over with you, the things that we're going to cover today. We want to talk about COVID-19's impact on our well-being individually and as workplaces, and also on our leadership. We're also going to explore well-being leadership. At the center, we have a program, a leadership retreat series that we call Well-Being Leadership. And so I'm going to pull some of our concepts from that program to talk about well-being leadership as a proactive strategy, if you will, for enhancing our resiliency during these difficult times, and also our leadership. We'll practice a leadership inquiry and meditation. That meditation will really focus in on what we know about our own inner resiliency. And then again, we're going to share some ideas and tools that we'll be sharing with you. And we're also going to encourage you and invite you to share your strategies and ideas with Mary Jo and I a little bit later. Now, I'm assuming that you all are just moving from one thing to the next, even working at home these days, and perhaps even more so because so many of us are working from home. So I thought it might be nice to start with a transitioning exercise or an arriving exercise. just a couple of minutes to kind of collect ourselves, to invite ourselves to be a bit more present, perhaps. So if you'd like, maybe just start by noticing your posture right now. I'm assuming most of you are sitting in a chair. Maybe just noticing the feel of both feet on the floor, and maybe if both feet aren't on the floor, taking a moment to help ground yourself that way, enhance a sense of stability in the body, if you will. And then maybe looking around the room and just noticing the environment that you're sitting in right now. And maybe noticing something unique or novel, or a sense of appreciation for a beautiful plant or whatever it might be. Just being aware of the environment, that looking around, broadening our perspective can help alleviate some stress sometimes, just to broaden our horizon, maybe even just looking out the window occasionally. And now if you'd like, an opportunity to close your eyes, or maybe just have a soft, simple, fixed gaze in a spot in front of you, and just turning that gaze inward now, aware of the feel of the whole body sitting here, the fact the body is supported and held by the chair, perhaps. And if you'd like, maybe taking in a couple of deeper, fuller in-breaths and out-breaths. And as you breathe out, maybe pursing the lips a bit and really allowing the out-breath to release all the way out. A couple more of those if you'd like. And then when you're ready, just noticing the natural rhythmic quality of the breath without forcing the breath to go deeper or fuller now. Just being with its natural rhythmic qualities of this breath that's always here for us to come home to anchor our attention to rejuvenate, to pause for a moment in our busy days. Just riding its wave for a moment or two. And then noticing the overall quality and condition of the body, mind, and heart now as we bring this little exercise to a conclusion. So opening your eyes if they've been closed. And let's just take a minute here to maybe record in the chat feature. What is it that you noticed in that little exercise we did, that opportunity to pause and just come home for a moment? If you just type in a word or a phrase, maybe Molly can share some of those with us. You can see some of them yourself as well.
So we have a number of responses coming into the chat, and it seems like most people felt grounded, calm, relaxed, settled. Those are some common words I'm seeing come up.
Thanks, Molly. Others of you may have noticed something very different, maybe how tight your shoulders are, or maybe a lot of racy thoughts. That can also come to mind, and we can become aware of those when we stop for a moment to pause. And the power of that is it enhances our awareness, taking little pauses like this throughout our day, so that maybe we can take note to take care of ourselves, maybe take a break, get a glass of water, allow yourself to put your face in the sun for a moment, enjoy the beauty of the day as well. So however you are and however you experience that exercise, we welcome you. Of course, we're all familiar with COVID-19 and the virus now. It's truly hasn't been in our vocabulary consciousness until recently. This novel virus, which we're finding dangerous and unpredictable and constantly changing. And that notion of this constantly changing time is also for many of us unprecedented. And we're experiencing things at a heightened level, things we may have known before, but really noticing now, many of you perhaps, these hardwired responses that we all have as individuals, as human beings, when we're faced with something we perceive as a threat. Heightened fear, anxiety, a sense of loss and grief. Some of you may be experiencing that. And I think all of us, to one extent or another, are experiencing disequilibrium. Our brains may be drawn to increased negativity bias as a default. Neuroscientists tell us that one of the primary functions of our brain is to keep us alive, of course. And as such, the brain is constantly scanning the environment for what's missing and what's not working as its primary function. And that may be a little bit on overdrive now. And as a result, as groups, teams, and communities as a whole, we're prone to increased stress. And because of that increasing tendency towards negativity bias for many of us right now, it can also lead to what's known as negative emotional contagion and infection, meaning group thinking, if you will. Now, as I say that, I have a feeling that many of you have also noticed something very different, and that would be positive emotional contagion and infection that can happen as well when we notice our neighbors, our coworkers, strangers applauding healthcare workers as they enter their hospitals and place of work. We've all seen those things. So there's that as well. And we're going to work with both of these today. So while we're experiencing all this, we also know that our leadership can be affected by this negativity bias and this tendency to negative emotions to kind of build on one another and to go viral. So let's take a look at that as leaders. When we get caught in rumination or leaning into our anxiety and thinking about the future, which is inevitable, we all are probably experiencing tastes of that throughout our days. We can engage in cognitive distortion, worst case scenario thinker, or denial of threats. We're seeing some of that as well. When we rest into and lean more and more into this negativity bias, we also have less access to the brain's prefrontal cortex. We get amygdala hijack, the more primitive part of the brain that enacts that fight, flee, or freeze stress response, can go on overdrive and literally disconnecting the functions, some of them at any rate, to our brain's prefrontal cortex, including reduction in our best thinking, perhaps, creativity, decision-making. And in terms of our relationships and communication, it can impair our ability to empathize, put ourselves in the shoes of others, listen, and maybe more compassionately relate to others and their difficulties. And it can also lead to allostatic load and burnout. Allostatic load, some of you may be familiar with, is the continued effects psychologically and physiologically to long-term repeated exposure to stress. It's about the wear and tear on our mental and physical health and well-being. So we want to safeguard this tendency, this behavior that may be showing up in ways in our lives right now. So we're all in this together. And the questions I think many of us are asking, I certainly am, is what can I do to ensure my own health, vitality, resiliency, and well-being right now? And what can we do collectively as leaders, as communities, in our workplaces? We're very fortunate at the University of Minnesota to have Mariann Jo Kreitzer's well-being model at 6 dimensions of well-being, really representing the whole person and our abilities to increase our capacity, regardless of our life circumstances, our personal limits, to experience well-being, a sense of ease and balance in our lives, even in the midst of really challenging times. Mariann Jo did a beautiful presentation last week, and Molly's going to put in the chat box, if you will, a link to that so that you can learn more about our well-being model and how she framed that specifically in terms of the pandemic. I'm not going to go too much more in depth than that, other than to say that at the core of that well-being model is really our ability to be resilient. and to enhance our resiliency, this ability, this innate ability we all have. But sometimes we just need to remember that and to reteach ourselves or train ourselves. Resilience is a tool that we can learn to help us withstand the strong winds of changing circumstances like we're in right now. Excuse me, I seem to have jumped ahead a little bit. So, resilience, as defined by Dr. Stephen Southwick, is the ability to bounce back after encountering difficulty or setbacks. And it's also this process of adapting well in the face of adversity or significant sources of stress. Obviously, things that we're all encountering right now. And some of you may actually be experiencing the gift of resilience of right now in your lives. But I think it could be a nice time for us to do a little reflective inquiry right now in terms of what we know about our own resilience. So I'm going to guide you through this. So if you'd like, you can either softly close your eyes or have a soft fixed gaze. Sit in a comfortable seated position. Just make sure that you're settling in, maybe having both feet comfortably on the floor. And we're going to turn that attention inward, just as we did earlier. Experiencing the feel of the feet on the floor. Gravity at work. The connection of your body with the floor, the earth itself, the feet. The weight of the body, again, being held and supported by the chair. And just turning your attention inward to the feel of the breath. Or maybe externally sensing sounds in the room. Or maybe silence. Just resting in stillness for a moment here. Riding the waves of the breath, perhaps. Or appreciating the sense of stillness and quiet. And then when you're ready, taking a moment to reflect on a time in your life that you experienced this ability to bounce back, where your inner resiliency really shone through. A recollection of a time. Maybe it's an appreciation for current circumstance and the resiliency that you have now. Or maybe taking a moment to reflect on generations of your ancestors and their resiliency, which has allowed you to be here now, showing up. And as you reflect on this inner resiliency, I'd like you to note for yourself what was present that supported your resilience. What was there? What was present during that challenging time that gave you an opportunity to really access, support your resiliency? And now, when you're ready, just allowing whatever came to mind to recede a bit into the background. Taking a deep breath in and out if you'd like. And we'll bring this reflective inquiry to a conclusion. So opening your eyes if they've been closed, maybe doing a little stretch if that feels good. And then taking a moment, if you'd like, to write into the chat what it was, what was present that supported your resilience during that difficult time that you recollected, perhaps now. what was present? And then I'm going to have Molly share a few of those with us. And again, you can see for yourself as well some things that people are writing into the chat. So just sharing what was present for you, honoring that now. And Molly, whenever you're ready.
So Mariann, this is Mary Jo, and I can summarize some of what I'm noticing on the chat. People are really talking about the importance of faith, of family, of friends, their drive to succeed, having greater compassion, relationships. Those are all things that contribute to their sort of past experiences and feeling resilience.
Thanks, Mary Jo. That's terrific. I want to go over a few things with you that we know support resilience. And I'm going to start with the first set, which we call the usual suspect. And I'm sure some of you thought about this, but it's the thing that when we go to the doctor's office, they ask us, how's your diet? Are you exercising? And are you sleeping? And also maybe a little bit about how are we handling stress? And so those just the usual suspects, I call them. But let's not discount those, because right now for many of us, our sleep has been disrupted. We might be working longer hours, and eating healthy meals can be really important. And exercising, no longer going to the gym, so having to find new strategies for that. So let's not underestimate the power of those usual suspects. But I'd also like to go over some other factors for supporting our resiliency that we don't always suspect. Really important is a sense of social connectedness. And in this period of time, of course, where many of us are physically separated, recreating a sense of community and support, really important for us in terms of enhancing our resiliency and getting us through those challenging times. Sense of purpose and meaning. Many of you talked about religion as an aspect of your life that's really important. Getting in touch with your own values and principles and staying in alignment with them, using them as a rudder, even during the most challenging and difficult of times. Positive mental outlook and the ability to regulate emotions. This is not about being Pollyanna, but remembering sometimes to lean on others who may be a little bit more inspiring or optimistic, or embodying a sense of hope during these challenging times can be really affirming and positive for us. And then noticing when we're falling into a negativity bias and remembering to see the goodness in our lives as well. We'll talk a little bit more about this a little later as well. And this ability to impact change in our life, this self-efficacy. So these are factors that support our resiliency that might be really helpful for each one of us as leaders now to recognize in our own lives, and what we might nurture in those we work with as well, all those people who we support and serve. And we're not going to have time to do this, of course, today in the little bit of time that we have together, but I encourage all of you to spend some time on your own, writing, journaling, reflecting, and considering what are your personal guiding values and principles. And maybe creating a Post-it and keeping it in front of your office or someplace that you can see visually throughout your day, and thinking, how might I allow these to guide my behaviors and actions maybe a little bit more today? Where are they showing up in my life today? And how might I rest on these as a way to help enhance my resiliency? A really good exercise, particularly now, because I think our values and our principles are really coming home to us right now, and maybe changing a bit too as we reflect on these times. So let me jump in now to our well-being leadership practices and models. I want to share some of the components of our programming with you. Let me start with a quote from Otto Scharmer, who many of you may know. His theory U is a lovely change theory. And he talks about the essence of leadership is to shift the inner place from which we operate, both individually and collectively. Now, one of the ways that we talk about shifting that inner awareness is through a practice of mindfulness. It's a strategy that's been demonstrated through over 30 years of research now to enhance resiliency and increase capacities for self-awareness and emotional self-regulation. And if you remember that negativity bias that we can lean into and the emotional contagion that we can get ourselves captured in, we can see how powerful this tool may be for us. Here's a definition of mindfulness. And again, the object of this presentation is not to do a whole session on mindfulness. So I'm also going to remind you, and Molly's going to put in the chat box, a link to an earlier session that I did a couple weeks ago on mindfulness, if you're interested in that. And of course, our website has many, many additional resources on mindfulness and well-being. But it's really about anchoring our attention in the present moment, which can be so helpful right now. With, as one of my teachers, John Kabat-Zinn, would say, with a non-judgmental attitude. We can have voices of harsh perfectionism right now, and it's really easy to jump into self-criticism. And instead, mindfulness can help us see another way, perhaps, allowing patience and kindness to ourselves and others to enter in. Now, meditation is clearly one way that we've all heard that we can develop mindfulness. But I want to suggest to you that there are many other ways to cultivate mindfulness, this ability to pay attention to our present moment rather than leaning into the future and inducing increased states of anxiety, for example. And that can be just taking purposeful pauses throughout our day. The body is always in the present moment. So coming home to the feel of the feet on the floor, looking around the room, using your sight or sound, receiving sounds can be a good anchor for us too. We're just coming to the breath, pausing for a moment and inviting perhaps a different perspective. John Kabat-Zinn, who I mentioned earlier, has a lovely quote: "We take care of the future best by taking care of the present now." And again, remembering that that's within our capacity in any moment to just come home, use the body as an anchor. Now, mindfulness has also been demonstrated to increase our self-awareness, and most leadership models, as you know, oftentimes rest first and foremost in this capacity to be self-aware and then to self-regulate as a result. And again, leadership is not just what you do, we all know that. It reflects this essence of who we are as human beings, reflects our interior condition, our presence, how we show up and communicate with others. Self-awareness is fundamental to leadership, and it's also the basis of emotional intelligence. And Daniel Goleman, amongst others, have done a number of studies leading to the significance of emotional intelligence over IQ, technical proficiency, and anything else. That ability to really be present to the emotional tone and quality in ourselves and others is critical, and particularly, I might add, in times like this. So this self-awareness also can lead to emotional regulation. And again, changing conditions that bring unexpected surprises can often trigger strong emotions. We're seeing that in ourselves and others. And self-awareness allows us to take that pause, to begin to notice and not judge the fact that we're feeling grief or loss or anger or frustration, impatience, but just understanding that's part of the human condition. And as such, taking a pause and perhaps caring for ourselves a little differently and then making a different choice helps us to develop acceptance and openness, understand our own values, and maybe perceive the world around you and allow for differing views and perspectives, opening up to others. Lovely quote by Sharon Sandberg here: "We can't change what we're not aware of." We cannot change what we are not aware of. And once we are aware, we cannot help but change. One of the places that we like to start with well-being leadership is actually something we call mindful self-leadership. And throughout these slides, I've tried to put some sources in case any of you would like to do some additional reading. But this is really this coherence, this alignment between what's most important in terms of our principles, our values, and our intentions with our actions, leading to impact It's really all about leadership starting from the inside out. Well-being leadership we define as leaders who practice this commit to daily personal well-being and resilience practices. It may be mindfulness, but it also may be practices of prayer or anything that you find to be rejuvenating. Contemplative practices of any kind, quiet reflection time, anything that can calm the mind, the body, and the heart. Some of you may do this through exercise, yoga. It's just a time that you set aside every day for you, knowing that this inner resilience can have such a powerful ripple effect on the lives of others, especially as leaders. So we take that serious. It's that old metaphor, but it's so useful, of putting the oxygen mask on ourselves first. There are some hallmarks of well-being leadership. Again, I've mentioned the self-awareness, this self-compassion, but self-confidence oftentimes can arise out of this as well. A humbleness along with that, and self-efficacy. You see emotional intelligence there, the EQ, the SQ, the social intelligence. But there's something that many have been writing about recently, and that's the curiosity quotient. It opens up our ability to perhaps be more empathetic and understanding towards others. Curiosity quotient, if you will. So leaders practice and demonstrate these, and we call it a practice because we're all learning and growing together on how to enhance our own personal well-being and then provide that as leadership. Well-being leaders are also passionate about making a difference in the lives of others. They lead with compassion and empathy for others, the suffering that we all see in the world right now. We're eager, if you will, to address that as best we can, whenever we can. And again, that purpose and principles coming in there. Accountable to ourselves, and also the ripple effect that we have on the lives of others. Now, these factors can be particularly important now when we take a look at the unprecedented rate of change. Again, just think back what life was like a week ago, let alone a month ago. Just rapid change. And some of you may be familiar with this VUCA that many people describe when we're experiencing rapid and uncertain times of change, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Clearly, we're experiencing that now. And there are, of course, principles and practices, best practices for dealing with change. One I'd like to highlight right now, however, is that when we're going through rapid and challenging change, it can be helpful to lead with remembering transitions. And that's the work of William Bridges and others as well, where they talk about this inner psychological process that people tend to go through and that they internalize when confronting and coming to terms with change, particularly the type of change that we're dealing with now. So learning how to meet people where they are. Bridges' model here shows us that he has 3 primary phases, and there's a source there for his book if you're interested in that. But basically, he talks about first that it's important for most of us as individuals, as workplaces, as leaders, to recognize that something is ending. There's a sense of loss, of letting go, and many of us are experiencing that now. Harvard Business Review recently just did a beautiful piece on grief and loss, and on our website we have a lovely article about it as well. Then we go through something called the neutral zone, an uncertain of the environment, not knowing, a sense of confusion and frustration can oftentimes be there. Fear can arise. And we're certainly seeing, I think many of us are cycling between that first zone of ending, losing, and letting go, and the neutral zone. Eventually we come to a new beginning. What may be particularly challenging for many of us now is that we're not sure when that new beginning is going to be. So taking care of our own well-being now and understanding that even more so because we're in these neutral zones and there's so much uncertainty in letting go, that we need to care for ourselves and others differently. So a couple of tools that we like to use in our well-being leadership tool that can help with transition. One is called gentle action, and this is based on the work of David Peat and others who study complexity and chaos theory as applied to organizations and organizational development. And they say that small changes can have very large effects. And turbulent systems may be sensitive to change. Stable ones can be highly resistant. So there can be real opportunities right now to help, to be of service. Making small changes can have big impact. Working together collaboratively. And individuals and teams' small steps create movement and momentum. The second tool, kind of related to this first one that I just mentioned, the gentle action, can be this 15%. This is a lovely tool that really allows us to think about how can we work with people that we support as leaders or teams, and what can they do? Let's empower them, what they can do without approval or resources and entirely within their own discretion to act. And there are many, many things that people can do now to feel empowered, to feel like they are taking action right there in front of them. Small changes, inspiring larger, maybe more sustainable changes. Each one of us can make a difference by starting with what is right in front of us today, and narrowing it down to what's in front of us today can be really helpful psychologically. So using this as a tool and thinking creatively, how can I work with my teams, my constituents, the people that I interface with every day to maybe think about this 15% tool. The late Stephen Hawking had a lovely quote. We are all very, very small, but we are profoundly capable of very, very big things. Coming with that gentle actions and the 15%. So there is another tool that I want to leave you with before I open our discussion. And this is the work of Rick Hansen, and he's a psychologist. Another neuropsychologists have talked about this as well. And it's the seeing the good as an antidote, if you will, to this negative emotional contagion that we can get caught in by viewing the news all the time and worrying about the future, etc. And some of that can be actually cultivating within yourself as a leader, more compassion for yourself and also others. Patience comes in there as well. Kindness and gratitude practices. All of these practices have been found to activate brain circuits that are key to enhancing our well-being and resiliency, releasing natural opiates and oxytocin. Oxytocin, some of you may know, is the self-soothing hormone. Other hormones, beneficial hormones, are also released as well. Practicing authentically compassion, kindness, and gratitude. Maybe just stopping throughout the day to reflect mindfully about things you are grateful for. And letting people know, saying that thank you. I'm noticing a lot of that reaching out happening now. And that reaching out has a real ripple effect. Not only does it allow you to see the good and feel better, but you're also igniting in others positive emotional contagion. And then we see reductions in emotional reactivity and improves coping. It quiets the stress response when we activate these more positive emotions, enhances a sense of connected with others, and reduces a sense of isolation. And many of us are experiencing heightened isolation right now, so it can be a powerful tool. And I think really importantly, it instills right now perhaps a sense of cope, and inspires those we lead, especially during challenging times. So just remembering that as a leader, many of you know we set the tone, and thinking of ways now that maybe you can very authentically inspire a sense of hope and seeing the good, gratitude in others. Coming, of course, first from yourself, from the inside out. So with that said, just that summary that I've done here now with this overview of our well-being leadership tools, I thought what I do now is turn this over to Mary Jo and me to actually start up a conversation with all of you. So Mary Jo, I'll turn this over to you now.
Well, Mariann, I'm going to begin by talking about application of some of what you've been describing as self-leadership. And one of the questions that I am hearing most often is, what are some practical things that I can do as a leader if I have that self-awareness and I'm sort of in touch with how important that is? What are my employees needing? What are they looking at me to bring? So I want to talk about some basic, again, sort of 101 principles that I think are really important. And the first one is to acknowledge the reality of the situation. We're in a time of such uncertainty and vulnerability. And I think it's so important to share with those around us, whether it's students or staff or employees, what it is we know and what it is that we don't know. And I'm not talking about the COVID-19 virus. I'm talking more about the reality of whether it's access to PPE equipment, whether classes are going to be online or face-to-face this summer, or, when are the shelter in order going to be, lifted. So I think it's really important for people to have leaders that will acknowledge the reality. Secondly, to acknowledge the range of emotions and experiences that their employees are going through. And I'm so struck with the fact that people are experiencing a tremendous loss and grief, but are having very different experiences. For some, it's relatively minor. It might be the small inconveniences, going to the grocery store and not finding what you're looking for on the shelf. But millions have lost their jobs, their livelihoods. Businesses may close and never reopen. People are feeling enormous isolation. And so I think acknowledging what it is those around us are going through is really important. Um, Encouraging people to take care of themselves and those around them. And I think that has come through very strongly in your message. And I think the last one is, I think people really look to leaders to put them in touch with resources. And one of the things that we've done at the Bakken Center, and Molly will put this link on the panel, is we've created resources that leaders can share with employees either directly, and so there's a whole range of topics that we're covering, everything from fear, anxiety, isolation, managing kids and working from home, that they can share PDFs of those resources, or they can kind of extract some key ideas from some of those resources and embed those messages in emails they send out or in huddles they're having with employees. So the last, practical tip that I would offer is that I think it's such an important time to offer our employees, those who are reporting to us, information and connections. And so it's really an important time, if anything, to over communicate. And so really make sure that people, are getting the information they need and are feeling connected to you, as well as connected to each other. So, Mariann, a question I'm going to pose to you, and I've seen this arise a couple times. Somebody writes, I have a negativity bias. I tend to see things from a glass half empty, not full. How do I get beyond my negativity bias? What suggestions, Mariann, do you have for people?
Yeah, thank you for that. The first thing that I'd say is that self-awareness is the key, and you've got that. So that's the first step, just being aware of that. And notice if you're, because we all have a tendency to do this, notice if you're harshly judging yourself for the fact that you are saying that you have a negativity bias. I think we all have that. It's just that sometimes it can be a little louder, playing itself out a little louder than others. And clearly this would be a time with all the stress that may be happening. There are some practices. I just mentioned cultivating, counteracting those as an antidote, if you will, to the negativity bias. Some can say mindfulness meditation can be a good tool to practice that, and practice it in really small ways. Maybe just sitting in silence for a few moments and listening to the spring birds are out now. It's one of my favorite things to do in the morning, and listening to them and just some quiet space and time. There are other things that you can do as well. Maybe keeping a gratitude journal would be one way to counteract that. An antidote to that negativity bias could be to engender authentic positive emotion. writing down things that you're grateful for. And when you three's it, go to 10, maybe count out 10 things. There's a psychologist and a mindfulness teacher who suggests, when I'm resistant to it, literally counting them out on your fingers, 10 things that you might be grateful for. Saying thank you, reaching out to other people and expressing your gratitude or your caring for them. Extending towards others can also be a way of feeding ourselves with those positive emotion and an antidote to that negativity bias.
So I really encourage, if you have questions, feel free to add them, to the chat function. So Mariann, you described, a gratitude journal. And do you want to talk a little bit about the practice of even 3 good things? Because that's another very, very simple one. And there's some evidence that if people do that for even up to 21 days, it can make a difference.
Just 3 things a day,
Mm-hmm.
recalling, is that what you're referring to, Mariann?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be really helpful. I have a practice sometimes. And by the way, what I didn't mention also in terms of cultivating positive emotion, let's not forget the power of sleep right now. And a good night's sleep can really enhance our resiliency and maybe put another filter on our day. And this practice of 3 good things. What happened today? What are 3 good things maybe that happened today? And they can be very small. But before you go to bed, it can be a nice time to do that. Laying in bed, maybe taking a couple of deep breaths and just reflecting on 3 good things, maybe encounters with someone. Maybe it was a beautiful sunrise or sunset that you saw. And just savoring that, allowing that to really embody that can be very helpful. Mary Jo, did you want to say anything else about that?
No, but one of our participants just said, I used your list of 3 good things for an icebreaker for a staff meeting last week, and it was a great way to look for positives. So I think something else, Mariann, that leaders are really encountering is as staff and teams, people that report to them, that have a tremendous amount of fear, anxiety and fear. And so I know one of the strategies that we often talk about is the importance of focusing on what you can control and what you can't control. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Judson Brewer, who is at Brown University and a neuroscientist, has done a lot of work in studying mindfulness, wrote a lovely article in Harvard Business Review about anxiety and working with it right now. And one of the strategies he talked about, which I think I'm going to show a little slide on a little bit later here, was this ability to just take one day at a time, one moment at a time, noticing our tendency to kind of lean into the future, and that can really induce a sense of fear and anxiety, but stepping back, and really just remembering what's in front of me now that I can act on that will really have some powerful ripple effects right here, right now, in this moment, this hour. So again, really focusing, kind of narrowing that in. And then when you're planning, of course, plan for the future, but don't be that constant leaning, again, can lead to increased fear and anxiety. And then I just think also the power of a purposeful pause, a mindful pause throughout your day, taking a breath, noticing that our stress when we're bracing or there's tightness in the body, noticing that and inviting a sense of ease in the body can really help with stress reduction. So purposeful, mindful moments throughout the day to counteract that tendency of tightness. When we're fearful, the body reflects that. So softening into the muscles, maybe going for a little walk, something like that. So enhance self-care.
So this person writes, I have noticed that fear and negativity is being fueled by social media. How do we guide our staff in this area?
Yeah, we've got some tips on that on our website right now, and I think in our toolkit too that Mary Jo referred to earlier. But I've been suggesting in a recent newsletter I wrote on mindfulness to people to maybe just choose 1 or 2 times a day that you're actually going to check your social media. For some of you, that's going to seem way too limited, but it might be really helpful for your physical and mental health and overall well-being to just navigate that a little differently. Not look at the news feeds or social media the first hour that you wake up, and maybe 2 hours before going to bed, if you can do it, maybe don't tap into the news or don't go into social media. So really regulate that a little bit more and look at the sources of information that you're choosing to pay attention to, because that can really feed that emotional contagion, that negative emotional contagion that I talked about earlier, and our own personal negativity bias too. So be careful what you're taking in on all levels. That could apply to food and exercise, but also social media and the news can be really helpful to navigate those more judiciously than you perhaps have in the past.
I think, Mariann, the social media example is such a great example of, when people are fearful, I think it's an important strategy is to focus on what you can control and what you can't control. And there's so many things at this time that we can't control. We can't control how long this is going to last. We can't control what other people are doing and how they're reacting. We can't control the amount of toilet paper that's going to be found in the store if others are doing social distancing. But what we can control are, your example, turning off the news, how much we interact with social media. We can control our own social distancing and following, what the CDC is saying. We can actually control how we're going to use this time. And I think that's an incredibly powerful, message to convey. One of our participants writes, I'm focusing on meeting employees where they are. Not all are in a position to do their best work, and that's okay for now. I want them to feel supported. I know they will come along and back to their full potential where they were before. To me, that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah,
Some thoughts about that, Mariann?
Yeah, when you were saying that, I was thinking earlier of William Bridges' model and the neutral zone and this letting go phase that we're all in right now. I think taking the time as leaders to really ask and to listen. Listen is such a powerful tool right now to reduce people's stress and enhance their sense of self-esteem, if you will, because some of that can be impacted right now with the sense of disequilibrium. I think listening is a really powerful tool. And then negotiating in a really understanding way with what is manageable right now. What can we do? That theory of what's right in front of us right now, today, and helping your employees manage their lives. I mean, it can be so difficult for many who have children and pets and many different people sharing the bandwidth and things going in and out of at their home. So I think a great deal of compassion and understanding that people are in transition right now and that they do probably need some guidance, some support, and some listening to, some understanding, and helping them figure out how they can better manage the scope of their work now.
Mm-hmm. Mariann, we just heard from Kit Brashears, our communications director at the center, and what Kit said about social media, and I think this is such a great point. Social media can be cultivated too. You can certainly be mindful in what kind of content you allow in your social media feeds. Now is a great time to reevaluate who you follow. If you're following brands, seek experts who aren't selling products or services, but are providing credible, vetted information. So I actually think, that is really a great tip. Somebody else writes, Mariann, how do we help our staff who are parents in trying to navigate family life, some with young children at home, and work life as well? What resources do you recommend?
There are a number of resources. Many people are writing about this right now, very credible sources, but I would just say that it's a difficult time. And I think understanding that up front and really embedding in yourself as best you can a sense of patience and understanding for yourself and others. I've heard people having family meetings where they're just understanding life isn't the way that it used to be. So let's create a kind of a new way and experiment with this. So I think there's a great deal of experimentation, a great deal of patience, and what I would call some mindful communication with one another, some intentional communications about how you want this time to be and how you can navigate that together in a way that creates a little bit more peace in your home. And again, for a lot of us, that's going to take conversations. Some of them may not be easy, but we can get through this together. And the first step is, I think, having helpful conversations with one another.
So, Mariann, on our list of resources on our COVID-19 site, we do have a tip sheet for parents who are trying to navigate managing their kids' school at home, and some easy tips about, even how much time a day and kind of how to approach that task. And I know there's a lot of parents that are concerned about, how do I keep my kids' schooling up? But I just want to kind of, end this chat session, and I'm going to kind of turn it back to you with a wonderful reflection that Mark Westfall has written. And he said, if I can leave you with one thing, it's this: at the end of all of this, your kids' mental health will be more important than their academic skills. And how they felt during this time will stay with them long after the memory of what they did during those weeks is long gone. So I hope that that message even sort of reassures parents that one of their most important roles is to share with their kids that they're doing all they can to keep their kids safe and that their children are loved.
Oh, that's beautiful, Mary Jo. Thank you. Reminds me as well of a Maya Angelou quote that people will forget what you said and what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Right?
Turning it back to you.
Thank you. All right, let me just conclude with a couple of slides here. What we just said, we will get through all of this together and perhaps come out stronger, better, more resilient in some aspects of our lives. I've got some tips here that I wanted to leave with you. And I was inspired by reading and much of the coverage that Harvard Business Review has right now. They have a coronavirus coverage and free access to some of their articles if you didn't have that. And so I've distilled these from some of those and just some practical tips. The first would be to really connect with calm. Make it a daily habit, however that shows up in your life and is meaningful for you. How do you connect with your own inner calm? And then charting that out, maybe putting it on your calendar, especially in the busyness of your house right now. I've heard people telling me they're getting up a little extra early and maybe going to bed a little earlier so that they have a little bit more private time in the morning. So however you can chart that out. Looking out the window, that may sound like a silly one, but we know that when we're under stress, we can induce there's trauma that we're experiencing. Many of us are. And there are some very simple tools like the one that I gave you when I was leading you on those exercises. Looking around the room, maybe looking outside the window, putting your face in the sun, drinking a glass of water, getting away from the computer screen if you've been staring at it for too long. It can be very, very stressful. So expanding your horizon is one way to take a look at that. Your attitude matters. It has a ripple effect on your own health and well-being and on those that you serve as well. So taking some time to pause throughout your day, those mindful pauses you can take to keep your brain online, remembering that we can hijack the amygdala with too much stress. So caring for yourself in a compassionate way. Take one day at a time. I mentioned Judson Brewer's comments on that and his article on Harvard Business Review, and he talks about taking one day at a time, one moment at a time, those purposeful pauses, and then asking yourself the question, what's called for now in this moment? What's called for now? I don't need to rush into the future, go into what if world, but right here, right now, what can I have impact on? What's called for now? All right, Molly, I'm going to turn this back to you to do some concluding comments.
Well, thank you, Mariann and Mary Jo, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. As I shared, I'll be sending a follow-up email with a bunch of resources and links, as well as a recording of today's webinar. And we hope you enjoyed the session today and are able to apply some of these tips during this challenging time.
Thanks, everyone.